Welcome to the Heart of Truth, a podcast for seekers, visionaries, and conscious heart and soul-led leaders navigating this global shift in consciousness. Hosted by Amanda Erin Kelly, author and founder of Illumina Wisdom School of Mastery, this podcast explores the full spectrum of our potential and the hidden mysteries of our world, both inner and outer. Let's dive in deep to the nature of reality and rise up ever higher into the light of truth as we navigate the hero's journey home to the heart of truth. Hello, beautiful soul. Welcome. So before we dive into the episode, I just wanted to share a quick note that yes, this is one of the original episodes from my first podcast, This Art Called Life, recorded almost exactly 2 years ago from when this is being published in early February of 2023. However, being that this is my story, it is obviously still entirely relevant. So the next few episodes will be those original episodes sharing my story, and then we will continue on from there. So let's dive in. Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to episode 2 of This Art Called Life, the podcast with Amanda Kelly, me. I am so excited to be here today because I am going to dive deeper into my own story, my own journey of evolution, not from the perspective of me. I have such an interesting story. Don't you all want to hear it? More so from the perspective that we see ourselves in others. And I share in the hopes that my own journey of evolution and awakening will spark some resonance, some deeper knowing within, some little intuitive nuggets that might help you connect the dots for your life. So that is my intention and goal with sharing my journey. And as I started thinking about it, I realized that I had to break this up. So this particular episode is going to focus on the first 30 years of my life. And I'm not that old, so it is not broken up into equal parts, quite obviously. But the acceleration of my journey really happened in the last 7 years or so. So that first 30 years just felt like a slow buildup. And that's why I decided to break it up like that. It leads me to a very pivotal moment in my life at age 30, which I will get to at the end of the episode. Anybody who knows me probably knows to what I refer at this point in time. So we'll dive in and start from the beginning. So, who is Amanda Erin Kelly, and how did she get to where she is today with her beliefs, with her perspectives, with her understanding of the world? Here I am, ready to share. And I just want to add in a little tidbit. If you hear a little knocking on a window, that is the resident cardinal. Oh, there she is. Or he, as the case may be. Very, very playful today. Cardinals actually remind me of my grandparents, particularly my grandmother. So I like to think that they are very present with me, guiding me when I sit down to share important messages or do anything pivotal for myself or my business, and just knowing that they're watching over. So I'm taking it all as a good sign. I hope it's not too distracting. Anybody watching this on video will see the little cardinal right there in the window. So here we go. I was actually born in Manhattan, a claim that not that many New Yorkers can actually claim. But when I was about a year and a half, I moved out. So I didn't grow up in the city proper. I grew up in the suburbs. But I was born in a maternity center, which is already a little outside the norm, I suppose you could say. Didn't really think much of it growing up. But in hindsight, looking back, I'm like, yeah, there are no accidents. And my mother made that decision. I think, it had an impact, because the more I learn about the birthing process, the more I can see how a lot of our modern methods are not in the highest service of either the mother or the infant, the newborn. As they come into the world, are they coming into fluorescent lights in a very traumatic way, a very sterile environment, cutting the cord immediately? That's quite a traumatic way to come into the world. Honestly, I don't know all the details. All I know is that my mother was in labor for about 24 hours. So I was, I guess, resisting coming in from the get-go. And I was born at 1:26 in the morning. So I am a little bit of a night owl to this day. Some of my most creative sparks have come in the evening. I find that my focus going back into high school, writing my papers, tended to come more in the evening time. So, that's a whole other layer that I'm not going to get into today, but it's just something that I've noticed and paid attention to, because I'll be typing away at 10 p.m. when most people are like get off the computer sometimes, and I'm like, yeah, that's not always my preferred MO either, but when the inspiration strikes, I'm not going to squash it down either. So yeah, I look on that and I'm like, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. So at 6 hours old, I was actually in a bar. Yes, you heard that right. 6 hours old was my first time being in a bar, because my parents happened to live over a bar. And at about 7 something in the morning, I guess there were some lingering individuals, and I was presented to them. So that is the origin story of my life. I have Irish parents, Irish Catholic grandparents. There's a little bit of German in there, Norwegian, Swedish, Scottish, a little Welsh perhaps even. So I am a whole bunch of Northwestern European things. The Celts, the Scandinavians, the Anglo-Saxons, the Germanic tribes, I suppose I could count all as my ancestors. So just little tidbits that I've picked up on the way and, tucked in my back pocket. What does that mean for me? How does that impact my trajectory in life, my beliefs, my habits, my worldview? What kind of ancestral trauma did I bring into the world because of that heritage? So here we go. The most notable thing about my babyhood was that I was actually a baby model. And it sounds really cute and fun, because it is. I guess I was a cute enough baby that I made it into I got some jobs. My little image was in catalogs and a magazine, and I didn't have too many jobs because I stayed bald for a while. My career ended because I was bald until the age of about 2. So I usually played a smaller baby, and I had a good temper. I didn't cry very much. So I was sometimes the backup baby, but I got the gig because I wasn't crying. So that's kind of a fun thing to look back on. And I have some of the photos. So there I was, kind of out in the spotlight in a way when I was just a tiny infant. But fast forward, we moved out to the suburbs. That was also something that kind of ended the career. When I was about, I don't know, a year and a half, a little older than that. And at some point in the settling in process, I made my very first interior design choice. Mommy, that one, when we went carpet shopping for my bedroom. It was, I don't know, probably 2 at best. And it was a little pink carpet with green and white, very girly, very princessy. And that was my childhood, surrounded by pink, surrounded by girly things. I was a total girly girl, dressing up like a princess, playing house. I loved all of that. I loved making my Valentines, and Overall, though, I was a very shy, quiet, introverted little child. So, very sensitive. And as I went through grade school, very, very studious. I channeled that into academics, into studying. I was also the oldest of two girls. My parents referred to us as twins 3 years apart because we both had red hair. We looked a lot alike. The genes were strong, whichever ones were most prominent. And that was also, that sister relationship was a really key part of my childhood as well, of course. So I love my sister dearly. And I had bright red hair going back into that Irish ancestry, bright red hair from the get-go. In fact, when I was in nursery school, I wound up painting my own hair orange because it seemed like a match, right? It was a little self-reflective on my part to realize my hair was basically orange. And fast forward many years, I was volunteering in India and I was volunteering with young children and they were like, "Your hair isn't red, it's orange." I was like, you know what? You're not wrong. Red hair often has more of an orange tint to it, and mine certainly did. It was a strawberry blonde kind of orange. So, as shy and sensitive as I was, I always kind of attracted attention, much to my chagrin, in part because of my very unique hair color. As I got older, I remember women walking up to me in restrooms. I was still a child, but women would come up and comment to our mother, and she would say, "Oh my goodness, if you only realized how much women pay to get that kind of hair." So I was always, I was very shy when receiving that kind of feedback. And also, I just felt very awkward, but at the same time proud. I was like, oh, I have this really cool thing about me that makes me stand out like a sore thumb. But people seem to appreciate it mostly. So I had this kind of dual mode of I want to go hide. And yes, here I am. Thank you for appreciating me. But it was not something that I was navigating very easily as a young child. I just wanted to do my own thing and be in my own little corner. So I buried myself in academics and competitive gymnastics. And come time for high school graduation, I really actively tried not to be the valedictorian because I really did get good grades. I got straight A's pretty much throughout. I tested well. And yeah, with sometimes minimal effort, I did study a lot, but I honestly even was embarrassed by my achievements by the time I got to high school and was, getting those national merit scholar, whatever the heck they call awards and things like that. I also, in freshman year, tested into the science league, which is basically it is basically the science version of mathlete. So I was a total science nerd. And I was very embarrassed when my name was one of the four to be selected to be on the science league. It was supposed to be a big honor. And I was like, oh my God, I'm that much of a nerd. No, I didn't want to be that much of a nerd. I wanted to get the best grades, but I didn't want to be a nerd. That was my thing. Like I loved looking good. I loved going shopping for clothes, but I was very shy and quiet. So I always knew I was not in the in crowd. I was not popular. I was way too shy to be putting myself out there. I was also very, very absorbed in my studies, in my gymnastics, but that was outside of school. I had to multiple days a week go to practice for a few hours at a time, and I would have competitions half of the school year that really took up a great deal of my energy and my time. So I didn't have as much time for social life as a lot of the other kids did. So it is what it is, and I wasn't entirely unhappy with the situation, and I did have friends. It's not like I didn't have friends. But I always felt insecure, I always felt shy, and I always wanted to bury myself in the corner, never wanted to raise my hand. As I said in the first episode, I never wanted to be called on. Amanda needs to speak up more in class. Amanda needs to speak up more in class. That was the consistent feedback every teacher would give me on every report card. They knew I knew the answers. And I just did not want to be seen or heard. I just wanted to do my thing and get out of there, basically. So I also attended mini med school. I had a huge focus on biology and science. Bio and chem were two of my better subjects. And I did pretty well in math as well. So I was very math science oriented, logic, focus, solutions. And because I was also good with children, I babysat on the weekends a lot of the time in high school to make my own money so I could buy the clothes that I liked. And my path, according to everyone, was to become a pediatrician. It made logical sense. Work with kids and math and science, I'll be a great doctor, right? So that was my guiding focal point as I went through high school, trying to get the good grades to get into a good college so I could get into a good med school so I could become a pediatrician. That was my life path according to my parents. And then I internalized that. I was like, okay, that makes sense. Easy, done. And of course, as a doctor, you don't have to be super visible or out there. You can do your thing, do your job well, interact with patients, and that was fine. That was it. For a little further perspective, I was so shy about getting up and reporting anything and allowing myself to be heard. In 8th grade, I just remember I had this project that I dreaded. I dreaded it so deeply because it was an oral report that we had to give on ancient civilization, something or other. It was actually my favorite history, learning about ancient civilizations, something that I will tie into later. But I was so abjectly terrified of getting up in front of the class that I'm sure my face was bright red the entire time. Honestly, don't remember, but I'm sure my cheeks were flaming red. And I practiced that speech with my little index cards written out over and over and over and over again until I had it basically memorized. And I just went up there and nonstop rattled it out. And then I sat down. Little did I know, I talked for far longer with great more detail than most of the other kids by a long shot. And the grade that I received on that, A plus plus. Not a real grade. But my history teacher was so impressed with all of the preparation I had done that it really paid off. Meanwhile, never wanted to do that again. Never, ever, ever wanted to have to get up in front of a class and share my work orally. I never wanted to answer questions. So that was me as a student in a nutshell. Of course, everybody loved to be paired with me in projects because they knew I would deliver and I would take on whatever slack they gave because I wasn't willing to get less than an A. Yeah, everybody loved to be paired up with me in the group projects because I would take on the burden of making sure it all got done and that it got done well. So, yeah, it wasn't across the board that everybody let me do all the work, but yeah, that happened more often than not. There we go. By the time I got to college, though, I was basically pretty burned out. So, halfway through senior year, I had been accepted to my top choice college, Boston College, and I just knew it was the school for me. I did apply for a couple of Ivies, but my heart was not in those applications. And I honestly did not actually want to get in. I had to apply to Harvard because my papa went there, and it gave him a great deal of satisfaction and pleasure to know that one of his grandchildren was considering it at the very least. But I have to be super honest, like I did not try nearly as hard as I could on that application. I don't know that I sent in the extra bonus things. I did the Common App and then if I did, it was like half-assed a little bit. And Yeah, so I really was not quite the overachiever that other students were. I did plenty to get into a good school. I was accepted into the honors program at Boston College. But what I wanted after an entire childhood and high school career of being so focused on studies is that I wanted a more full experience. Boston College had decent sports and it had cheerleading. I did not think about this when I first applied, but after I was accepted, I realized, okay, they don't have a gymnastics program. What am I going to do? And I had already quit gymnastics at the age of 15. At the ripe old age of 15 and a half, my career ended. And I dabbled with cheerleading at my high school, and it was not we weren't good. We weren't good. You know, it was fun. It was absolutely fun, but I did field hockey in the fall, cheerleading in the winter for basketball, and then I dabbled with track. Wasn't so great. Well, I found out that they were having tryouts one of the weekends that was kind of this open house for incoming freshmen, and I had a girl in my grade who was going up, and I was like, "Oh my god, I need to go up and try out." I already knew I was gonna be going there, and so it was just going up for fun to do my thing and to see my grandparents who lived just outside of Boston, about 20 minutes, 10 minutes away from campus, something like that. And I went, I did my tumbling, I stomped on a girl's head when they accidentally, of course, when they put me up in the air to test me out as a flyer because I was small, 5'2" on a good day to be precise. But because of my tumbling skills, they were like, "You're on the team." So already there I was, just diving headfirst into college life, and I was so excited for this new chapter. And as I said, by the time I got to college, I was burned out. So there I was, biology pre-med. I had to repeat biology for like what felt like the fourth or fifth time. So I was actually very bored. So I barely showed up to class. Realized how much I hated chemistry, dreaded chem lab, and I was just going through the core classes. So I became so focused on both cheerleading and partying. That was my focus in college. So, really, my intuition led me there on a couple levels. But what I really needed at that time in my life was to find myself. I did something entirely out of the ordinary for me, and I decided not to pursue pre-med. I decided not to major in biology anymore. And that kind of left me at a little bit of a crossroads like, okay, what next? What am I here to do? But the idea of psychology I found to be very, very intriguing. And then I was like, okay, well, therapists are like doctors, but for the mind instead of the body. So that felt very aligned. And as I got deeper into psychology, I became more and more fascinated. I wanted to learn more and more about the brain, about our development. And by the time I got to senior year, my two favorite classes that I took in psychology were the psychology of trauma and social and emotional development. But by the time I got to my senior year, I also realized, this is so when I decided I didn't want to be a doctor, I was like, it feels too sterile. I didn't think that much about that thought at the time, but that was the reasoning that came through most strongly. It feels too sterile. Okay. And then it got to time to consider, okay, am I going to apply for psychology programs? I realized, okay, that's another 7 years of school. Didn't want to do med school for a reason. Kind of faced with a similar situation. And I had this thought, well, I don't want to go to school for another 7 years to work with depressed people my whole life. Maybe not a very generous thought, but something that just resonated very deeply for me. And little did I know at that time that my intuition was picking up on something much deeper, that this path wasn't for me. Those paths weren't for me. To be within the system, that was not the path for me. Took me a lot longer to figure that out fully, but those little seeds were being planted. Not for me, not for me. Didn't feel right. I had also studied abroad. I was a biology major with a minor, psychology major. I switched from biology to psychology, and then I minored in French, and I wound up nearly having a minor in art history quite by accident because I studied abroad my junior year. I went to Paris to study, and the way the French system is I could not study both psychology and art history. I was like, oh, of course, natural fit. I will fulfill my arts requirement while I'm studying in Paris. What better place? But because I had enrolled to take classes in art history, I was precluded from taking psychology classes. So I wound up taking not one, but three art history classes. And then by the time I got back to, for senior year, I wound up electing another art history class, and it wound up being my hardest class of the second semester, funny enough. But it's just kind of funny because there I was entering into college, biology, math, all that kind of focus, biology pre med, and I wound up shifting gears in a very unexpected, unanticipated way, not even self directed. It just kind of evolved and flowed that way. There I was focusing on psychology and art history, and my time in Paris just really opened up my mind to the broader world. I traveled to Europe for the first time. We traveled when I was a child, but my mother was very adamant about the fact that the first time I go to Europe should be on my own as a student, like older student, because that's how she did it. So she decided that it had to be the same way for me. And I had an amazing time. I traveled all around Europe, did the whole Euro trip thing, and I really got to see those older cultures that resonated really deeply with me. And I just appreciated so much the beauty and the old art and architecture. I loved it. I fell in love with Europe. It just felt so much more romantic, so much more beautiful, so much more right and aligned with how we're meant to live our life. Look at the lifestyle of Europeans, quite different from New York City, go, 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 achieve, achieve, achieve. And that really stirred something within me. But I was also there partying and numbing. Of course, the drinking age is very different there. So I could legally go out to bars, and I took full advantage of that. So I did have this phase where I was engaging in really quite unhealthy behaviors, but it was very normalized being in, American undergrad mentality. Everybody was binge drinking. That was the norm. Come the weekend, everybody was partying, everybody was drinking until they got wasted, basically. And I I knew it I didn't feel good, but it was also normalized. Like the hangover, so normalized. The feeling like shit the next day, so normalized. The joking about our crazy antics. Everybody did it, right? So I didn't really see it as that much of a problem because it's not like I was craving alcohol every day or anything like that. I was engaging in your typical stupid college behavior. So there was that layer that I was kind of sucked into, unconsciously sucked into that pattern, that way of life, that way of living that was really not by a long shot for my highest good. So, for the record, I still wound up graduating with a pretty solid GPA, but what's interesting to note is that my best semester ever was my second semester of senior year when I had another course compared to everybody else. I had to overload because of uh, stuff that happened with my switching my major and going abroad. I had to take 5 courses instead of 4 my senior year. It wasn't the end of the world. It just meant extra work when everybody else had more chill time.
But the upshot is that by second semester senior year, it was pure electives. And I actually enjoyed every single course that I took. And I got straight A's that year, that semester, while I was partying more than I ever had. So it doesn't really make logical sense. But from the perspective of, okay, no, that behavior wasn't of my highest good, I was also simultaneously so highly engaged with what I was learning that I still knocked it out of the park in spite of the self destructive, self sabotaging behavior. I still showed up and did the work absolutely to the best of my ability because I liked what I was doing. I was engaged with it. So the more I think about that, the more I think about the way our world is structured, right? I see so many people just kind of going through the motions in their jobs, and nobody is fully thriving. They're not fully living, right? So that was my first glimpse into the importance of really allowing ourselves to follow our passions, our interests. What brings us curiosity? What lights us up? What are we interested in? What do we want to learn about? What do we want to engage in? That makes a world of a difference. It really does. And then I also had allowed myself to open up. I was allowing myself to be seen as a cheerleader who actually made it onto TV. Little snippets in the background a couple times, like, there I was right on the camera. That was fun on the big screen in a stadium of 40,000 or whatever it is. I was most definitely allowing myself to be seen in a way that I would have been terrified of before. Speaking was another matter, but there I was, at least allowing myself to be more visible. So, fast forward, I got a job working in Manhattan in fashion. Sounds fun, right? I was like, okay, well, if I'm not going to become a serious doctor or therapist, let me do something fun. I always liked clothes, I always liked aesthetic. And I figured fashion would be a really fun path for myself. And then I could, just figure out what that pathway would look like. Within a couple months, I was done. My boss at the time, I learned a couple valuable lessons, but also was being treated like crapola, really excessive expectations, long hours for minimal pay, and it just was not serving my highest good. I had interned there the previous summer, and then when I was actually getting paid, it was just a totally different ballgame, and I was not getting paid a lot. I was like, "This is not worth my life by a long shot. We're not saving the world here. What is so urgent? Why are we making such big drama out of every little thing?" So I quit, and when I was job searching, I found Teach English in Japan. Totally out of the blue, out of the norm, and I just had this little intuitive thing, let me just apply. And one thing led to another, and it was a bit of a process with the visa and everything. So I got a little job babysitting in the meantime, but I wound up moving to Tokyo less than a year after graduating college to teach English in Japan. And it was probably one of the better decisions of my life because, again, there I was taking myself outside of my comfort zone in a very big way. Number one. Number two, I was exposing myself and immersing myself in a completely foreign culture. Anytime we take ourselves out of our comfort zone, it really forces us to grow. And when I was there, I met a bunch of amazing people. They hired Westerners because they wanted native speakers. They did not actually want us speaking in Japanese, even if we did know it. So arriving there with two words, arigato and konnichiwa, that was plenty for them. I tried learning. It was very difficult. There's three different character systems. So it's not the easiest language to learn. But I met who would become my boyfriend for a number of years, and he was British. So I had a lot of expansive and growth experiences when I decided to move to Japan. And there I was, like, getting a regular paycheck, doing a regular job, but having this really interesting and unique experience of living in a totally foreign country across the world. But it was also very westernized, and everybody was so polite. Everything was so clean. I love that about Japan is everything is just so clean, so tidy, so efficient. The metro system there, the subway system is like to the second. They are on time, leaving the station, everything is efficient, everything is clean, everything is orderly. And, every society has its shadow side. There are some pretty dark shadows in Japan as well. But I was like, this is a really beautiful example of what ordered society could be. There is a great deal of repression over there, from what I found, a great deal of shame over not being able to speak a perfect English sentence, for example. Thus, the need for the schools that like the one that I taught in. So it was quite an interesting, eye opening experience. The clash between East and West in Japan was really, really profound and fascinating to witness. Their culture is just on another level, its own thing. We have all that Zen, but then the crazy Shinjuku, Harajuku stuff, people dressing up, crazy vending machines, vending things that you don't even want to think about in some cases. So it was quite a fascinating time in my life. And I explored the country. I even went skiing. I went to a lot of the temples. I made it to Kyoto a couple times. It really just was so deeply fulfilling. And I realized going back that my mother and my grandmother, they had a lot of Asian influence, Asian inspired decor in their homes. And so I thought about that a bit. And my papa, he actually was in the Navy in World War II and had worked on naval ships, fighting Japan. So that was the enemy. And also, my grandfather, he was a commander of submarines. So he was also in that side of the world and one of the first Westerners to step foot on Japanese soil after they, called the ceasefire or whatever, but a lot of people weren't even quite aware of that. So yeah, he had some interesting exploits over there himself. And it just made me think about these subtle influences in our life, and that one of my favorite courses in art history was Eastern influences on Western art that I had taken in college. So, in hindsight, like none of it was an accident. It all kind of guided me there. And while I was there, my ex-boyfriend, he was like, do you want to travel with me after this contract? I don't want to resign. I don't want to stay here any longer. We had done just over a year. We arrived at the exact same time. And we decided once we fulfilled our contract, we would travel. So we went to China, Nepal, and India. And in India, he had decided that he wanted to teach English more, but in a different country. So he got a different certification. And at that point, he was like, okay, well, I'm doing this. Maybe you can find something for yourself to do, like volunteer or whatever. And we were also kind of trying to figure out logistically, like he was British, I was American, what was the future of our relationship. So I found a yoga teacher training in India across the country outside of Mumbai and Nasik. So that was a big a stretch for me because I got on a train and I went across the country by myself. I honestly, there were times in hindsight that I'm like, I probably should have thought more deeply about it, but it's almost probably better that I didn't overthink it. I was like, oh, I'll do the whole backpacker in India experience because I'm young and I can handle it. But it really was not easy. And it's quite a different culture. And I found myself in some less than pleasant experiences. Nothing obviously that was too bad, but there were moments where I was concerned and in a little bit of fear because I did not feel entirely safe. So it was definitely its own experience. I wound up staying nearly 6 months in India, and at the time, my ex and he got another job, and we decided to kind of break it off because, the logistics were just a little tricky. So there I was doing Eat, Pray, Love in India kind of before it came out. I was there finding myself at the age of, what, 23, and it was definitely eye-opening on a lot of levels, and it just evolved. I didn't plan to stay there for 6 months when I first arrived. I was like, "Let me do my teacher training, and then I'll probably go home after that." But once I was there, the financial crisis had hit, and I was like, "Well, it's not like there are a plethora of jobs. There's no rush for me to get back, and I have this cushion from what I had saved, and India was cheap." I was like, "When am I ever gonna have this opportunity again?" So I wound up staying in India, and after the yoga teacher training course where I was at an ashram, immersed in every aspect of yoga for a month, learning, studying. It was mostly Westerners on the course. And I decided to travel a bit. And then I went up to Dharamsala, which is the north of India in the Himalayas, the border of India and Tibet, basically, the land of the Dalai Lama, as I called it. And I wound up doing an introduction to Buddhism and meditation course, a 10-day silent retreat that was not Vipassana, as a lot of people are familiar with. It was a less strict version of that, we could say. But we were in silence, and we had 1 hour a day where we had the opportunity to discuss the Dharma of the day, but we weren't supposed to stray from that. And we weren't supposed to whisper to our roommates at night. And my roommate, she wound up leaving after 2 days because she couldn't handle it. And I was like, great, I get all this time and silence to myself. This is wonderful. I loved it. It was also a really beautiful, serene environment in the mountains. And it was just one of the most beautiful experiences I had at that point in my life. And then, one thing leads to another. I decided to stay up there for a little while longer. I was looking in my little Lonely Planet guidebook. I saw something about this volunteer organization in the south of India. I was trying to figure out what to do next. And I was like, oh, yeah, volunteering and teaching English. I could totally do that. So I wound up booking a trip all the way down to the south of India to go teach English to a school in a rural village of South India. And that was absolutely eye opening. And while I was volunteering there was another woman volunteering, an Indian woman, and she was the first in her family to get a master's degree. But she told me that she was experiencing a great deal of pressure from her family to get married. Meanwhile, her own cousin had been, oh, this is a little dark. Her cousin had been lit on fire by her husband because women were property of their husbands in that culture. And there was just this moment of absolute stark reality of the fact that people in other parts of the world still experience this. Women still face so much oppression, so much repression, so much just straight up violence just for being a woman, and so much disrespect. And that just left a very profound mark. That was probably the most profound moment of my time in India, that it just stayed with me. So fast forward, my ex then invited me to come to. I also had an unexpected stint in Sri Lanka, and that was just a beautiful country. A lot of synchronistic moments there, I guess you could say. And I did another 2 ashram stops on my way out of India. I did another Zen Buddhism course, and I went to Amma's ashram, the Hugging Saint in Kerala. And then I made my way over to Egypt, which was an entirely unexpected situation. But my ex's aunt was living in Cairo and she worked for the British something or other. So we stayed on this beautiful island in the middle of the Nile, and we went to the pyramids, and we went to the Sinai Peninsula, climbed Mount Carmel at night to watch the sunrise, had some really, really beautiful experiences. And in hindsight, I can now look back and see that things were being activated, seeds were being planted when I was traveling to these places at the time that I did. So I wound up back in New York, and I, the people say that when you go abroad, it takes a bit to reacclimatize if you go abroad for an extended time. And that was absolutely the case for me. I couldn't really quite get my grounding when I got back. I felt like a fish out of water, to put it mildly. I decided to do another yoga teacher training in New York to kind of acclimatize myself to Western yoga teaching styles. And I had learned hatha. I really preferred a flow style anyway. So vinyasa, that's the style that I did. And it just kind of wasn't clicking for me. I still carried a great deal of anxiety over getting up in front of class and teaching. So that was something that I was grappling with. And returning to the epicenter of materialism, the concrete jungle of Manhattan, after having witnessed some of the most destitute and impoverished in India, it was a very, very shocking contrast for me. And, perhaps that's also why Tokyo didn't feel all that foreign to me, because even New York City felt foreign in its own way. They were both big, huge cities. But yeah, it's something that I could never quite get my grounding in New York, even though I was born there. So I I was fumbling my way through life back in New York, but the idea to apply to grad school came to mind. And I found a specific program, very, very specific, social and cultural psychology, a master's degree at a school in London. That's where my ex was. So it felt really right. And then, sure enough, we were in touch. He said he was coming to visit, and he asked if, I was open to seeing if this could be a thing ongoing and getting back together, even though we were doing distance. And I was like, well, the honest truth is, I already found a grad program in London and I've always wanted to live there. So let's see. Let's give this a shot. And at the time, didn't really think so much about it, but I literally put all my eggs in one basket and I applied to one program at one grad school. So talk about putting all your eggs in one basket. It wasn't just grad school online. It was my relationship. It was my entire life. It was where I was going to be living in the world. But my intuition guided me in the right direction. I was accepted. And next thing I knew, I was preparing myself to go to London. So I studied social and cultural psychology there, and my elective courses were consumer psychology, evolutionary social psychology, uh, rational, or what is it called? Behavioral decision making, something like that. And my thesis paper was on financial decision making in context. I pulled in some intertemporal discounting, set up a whole, study where I put them in different, contexts. And basically, my advisor told me, he was like, "You have a PhD project on your hand. You realize that?" I was like, "Yeah, but I really want to do this." And he knew I was going to be stubborn about it. So I did. And I did get a distinction on that one. And my other favorite paper that I wrote was, well, my actual favorite paper was evolutionary social psychology, the evolution of humanity from the cell to society, something along those lines. That was the title. And I absolutely loved writing that paper. And some of the books that stick out in my mind to this day that really had an impact in the way I saw us in the world and how we develop, perspective taking was a huge focus of that degree. I was looking at identity economics, the paradox of choice, the Darwin economy. So not just how we interact with people, but it's how culture and society really influences us, and not just, our identity, but how we behave economically, so on and so forth. So all of that learning really has shaped my perception of the world and my perspective of our place in it as well. So that was back in 2012, 2011 to 2012, the year of the London Olympics. And according to Mayan prophecies, not that I was thinking about this at the time, but the end of times, right? So it was, I don't think, accidental that I wound up doing my grad degree there at that time. I had this moment that I was sitting in the library writing my papers, and a very, very clear message came through that now I understand. I will share more about that in another, because this is a whole subject. I'll share more about that in another episode. But it was, looking back, a key pivotal moment in my own awakening journey back in 2012. Definitely not an accident. And again, it's putting these pieces together in hindsight that I can see my path clearly. At the time, I didn't really see it. I didn't understand it. I didn't know what was guiding me forward or that I even was being guided forward. But I was consistently, with those big decisions in my life, tuning into my intuition and allowing it to lead. But that then I've finished my dissertation, but then I also experienced a sexual trauma. And at the time I was handing in my dissertation, I was starting an internship in London, and I was traveling to Greece for the weekend with my friend, all in the same week. So I didn't really have time, quote unquote, to consider it, to deal with it, to do anything. I eventually went to the doctor, to get blood tested, and I fell off the chair because I fainted. I was like in body shakes, and I had this moment where I didn't know because I was still passed out, but I had this sensation of being stuck in a box, like, full body box, I'll call it, coffin vibes, I suppose, where I was banging to get out, like I was trapped inside, buried alive. So that was something that I really didn't know how to process or grapple with. And I came to lying on the floor of the doctor's office, a few doctors standing around me, like in fetal position, like just my body was like really tense and tight. And the thing is, in that moment, it was a very confusing situation for me. But the moment of the trauma itself, it felt like everything was sucked out of me. Everything was just sucked out like a vacuum. I felt empty. I felt hollow. And I did not know how to process it. I didn't know what to think of it. I didn't know how to explain it even. To this day, it's kind of a difficult thing to verbalize that sensation. And it was just a feeling of complete disempowerment. I was stuck, locked in position. And I can see now how profound that experience was for me, even though it was just a few moments, really. But knowing that trauma gets stuck in the body, and knowing that there are so many deeper layers to all of it, I can really see how that impacted my life and things that would happen illness wise going forward. So I stuck out with my internship at Transparency International. So I was learning deeply about corruption in the government and in business, particularly the defense industry. So that was quite an interesting thing that came into my field. And January 2013, I tried to stay in London, but of course they got rid of the post-study visa, and I just trust that everything happens the way it's meant to. So I had to move back to New York City very reluctantly. But I remember walking out of a cafe at one point, and as soon as I got onto the street, I just had this profound sensation wash over me that it felt like the beginning of the novel Atlas Shrugged. And if you're not familiar with that, I may do a whole episode about that as well, but it's a novel about a dystopian future where the government takes over. And I don't know what it was that sparked that feeling, that sensation, but that is very deeply what I felt, and I can bring myself back into that moment right now. And then fast forward a few years later, Lord and Taylor was shutting down, and I like I just remember walking into the vestibule and there was like leaves and papers and there were completely empty cases inside. It wasn't They were still trying to get rid of inventory, so it was open, but it was empty. And it was just this sense of utter desolation and desperation that brought me again back to that moment at the beginning. And now here we are. The world is, people might not see it that way, but look at what's happening in cities across the country with the homelessness and everything that is, small businesses shutting down and the global corporatocracies taking over more and more and more. So all of these moments have just stuck in my brain, and I can now put these pieces together in hindsight and say, oh, it's like part of me knew what was coming. So fast forward 2014, I did another yoga teacher training, hot power yoga this time. And I just remember I was out tutoring in the Hamptons that summer, and I remember getting sick. Like middle of the summer, I got very sick, couldn't get out of bed for a couple days. I had to call out of a few sessions. I stayed there over the weekend, took a hot bath. That was super nice, but the upshot is that I realized in hindsight that I had been getting sick like clockwork for a year. That might have been in summer of 2013. I can't remember now. Yeah, I believe it was summer 2013. But I realized I had been getting sick like clockwork. And then I, shifted companies. I was an academic coach at that time, putting into practice a lot of the psychology, and I became director of the performance program at my new company, where they put a big emphasis on test anxiety, because a lot of our students were coming to us not because they didn't know the answers, but because they were blanking out at test time. The anxiety was overwhelming them. So with my background in yoga and my psychology degrees, I became the director of the performance program, creating tools and so on and so forth. And then, it felt like a very aligned situation for me. I was always academically inclined, good at what I did. And I saw this blossoming into something. And then, my bosses at the time didn't see it moving in that trajectory, at least not immediately. So I was beginning to feel stuck and unfulfilled. Life in Manhattan was difficult. I was also doing the reverse commute. I had my amazing little Mini Cooper mermaid car, teal green Mini Cooper with white racing stripes and a moonroof and a white mirrors and everything. I loved her, Luna. And so I had aspects of my life that felt very aligned, but there was also huge parts of my life that I was not feeling good. I was not feeling fulfilled. But life goes on. I kept trying to fit myself into the mold of New York City, and I just kept pushing forward. And oh, of course, my ex and I broke up in London when I was halfway through. I forgot to mention that kind of key aspect. Halfway through my grad degree, we broke up. New Year's in Paris of all places, all times and places. So the second half of my degree, I was really focused on me and moving forward and just like pushing through my own personal stuff. And I was really experiencing a lot of disappointment in my romantic life as well. I couldn't quite figure out, what was not aligning, why I couldn't attract somebody great. But in hindsight, I'm like, oh, there was so much trauma there that I hadn't processed. Of course. Of course. And I always thought I was processing it. I always thought I had dealt with it, but there was so much deeper that I had to go. Travel was also my happy place, but it was like, my form of escape at a certain point in time. And while I was living in New York and working, I had this moment where I was like, I just wish I had a reason to. I was searching for, what to do with my life. And I came across this article by a woman who was a coach. I forget what her obstacle was that she had overcome. But I sat there and I was like, I wish I had a reason, a good enough reason to be a coach. I was like, this resonates with me. This feels like a lot of psychology, but not stuck in that box of a therapist. And then fast forward Thanksgiving of that year, I had like a minor chest pain. I got a massage and something shifted. And so I went to the doctor a week later because I had this minor chest pain. And he diagnosed it as pleurisy, young, active, healthy 30-year-old. He wasn't going to jump to anything more serious, and I don't blame him for that. It was winter. I was stressed out. Of course, there was plenty of reasons why something was a little off in my body, a little inflammation of the lung lining. Okay, so he put me on antibiotics, and the antibiotics didn't really do much, but I was, just focused on my job. And then I went to Costa Rica in February because it's like, I need sunshine. So in that time, that was New Year's 2016, I booked a personal retreat. I did something out of the norm. Previous year, I had been in Brazil. It was amazing. And this year, I was like, I need a break. I need a rest. And I need to do some kind of personal retreat, like a vision board vibe. Like, I'm going to do my own thing. So I found this adorable little all white cottage in East Hampton, and I booked it for myself for a few days to retreat into the woods and have my own beautiful, magical New Year's, because I'd also been dealing with a little bit of heartbreak frustration. And I was like, I just got to do me right now. So I did that, and I had the idea for a blog, this art called life. That was the moment that the idea came through and it solidified. And I was like, I don't know what this is going to be about, but it just resonated and it felt right. And then a few months later, March 22nd, 2016, to be precise, I got my first CT scan that ultimately led me to the diagnosis of having cancer. And all of a sudden, I had a very real reason to be blogging. So I will wrap that up here for today. That first 30 years of my life up to my cancer diagnosis. So yeah, a lot to share. I hope this resonates. I hope this is somewhat interesting for a few people out there. But I just kind of felt compelled to share my journey and all the little seeds that were planted and the little sparks that were ignited within me on some level of my being that I didn't even consciously understand until years later, looking back, I realized, oh, wow, I was always being guided to this moment here and now. So I will wrap it up there, onward and upward, and I will see you soon in the next episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am sending you so much love, beautiful beings, and I look forward to sharing so much more with you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Heart of Truth podcast with your host, Amanda Erin Kelly. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating or review on your favorite platform. And if you'd like to go deeper, grab your copy of my book, Let There Be Light, and join us inside the free community in Illumina Wisdom School, where you can access free resources to jumpstart your journey, such as a higher self activation and the Body Temple Blueprint Masterclass, as well as explore the plethora of resources, including Awakening Fundamentals and Luminary, my signature path to wholeness and mastery, to help you become your own healer and sovereign authority. You can access everything at thisartcalledlife.com or find the links down in the show notes below. Until next time, onward and upward in love and light as we journey home to the heart of truth.